convergence of blockchain and AI. Now, with AI, you can expect within this year, we're going to see deepfake so real, you cannot tell the difference. People watching this on live stream, they will not know what's here.
We're not here.
We're having dinner somewhere else. So to counter that, you need some form of digital watermark. Mm-hmm. That is actually a cryptographic evidence
that this is real.
Yeah. It's my signature, his signature.
Who puts that? The tech companies? By the way, they're so excited at the back. They're trading crypto on the back of these comments.
It's all your fault. No, we control our private key. It's going to be a private public key.
It'll be personal.
We'll have control.
It's going to be like your irises, your fingerprints. It'll be a digital.
But it's stored on blockchain, witnessed by the global population.
Everybody knows.
Cannot be faked.
Yeah. But does this change everything for just capital markets?
It will. Yeah, I mean, my gosh, if we could tokenize bonds and stocks tomorrow, one of the great things that BlackRock is being accused of is how much vote we have. I wouldn't vote anymore because we would be able, through tokenization, to know the owner of record instantaneous, and each owner of record will do their proxy voting. I would love that outcome. No, but it would democratize investing in all ways that we can't imagine.
Even political systems, how you vote in a country, can be changed by that.
And do you think that, again, the Trump administration will accelerate that?
I think they're moving that direction. How far they actually will go remains to be seen.
But if you do have a digital validator, like your fingerprints or your irises, I mean, you could tokenize voting. You could do everything. And so it will change how we think and how we live and what we do. And
we've been talking to some Southeast Asian governments, including Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia. All of them historically have the populations who are trading black market, bitcoins, and what have you. But now the governments are realizing U.S. is driving a global policy shift. So they're now doing something very clever. They're saying, you know what, we're going to issue a new form of digital ID to every single citizen. Along with that is a digital wallet.
Which Brazil and India has already done.
You're both.
I was a piece from World Economic Forum last year, the day after Donald Trump was sworn in.
There are two questions, and I have a third issue that I think, Ruben, you need to address. But let me start with the questions you have raised. I think first the issue of INEC. I think everybody is fairly aware that INEC, as presently constituted, has lost a lot of credibility. And it is very important that the institution gains this credibility. Otherwise, the stability of the country is going to be threatened. Because when you have institutions that are not delivering, and especially a key institution like INEC, and if this failure continues, then it will erode not only, confidence in INEC, but confidence in democracy itself. And when that happens, you know the consequences. So let me come back to INEC. I think there are amendments that the whole country is waiting for. For example, that amendment, which I think late President Buhari refused to give assent to, which mandates INEC to use electronic electronic tools and to use technology in delivering the result is still pending. But more importantly, why should the president, whoever is the president of the country, who is an interested party in the election, be the one to propose the head of INEC? I think late Uwais committee has made very good recommendations, which have been blocked by those who are interested in manipulating INEC. I think we have to rescue INEC by making sure that the head of INEC is not appointed by a sitting president who is going to be interested in election. So there are a number of things that needs to be done. I'm not sure there is sufficient time for us to raise that, but I think the key issues are two. One, that INEC's credibility is at stake, and two, we have got to insulate INEC from political interference. If that doesn't happen, then it is the democracy that is holding the country that's being actually run down. And when that happens, there are consequences. The second question, if I remember correctly, which you raised, is where do we go from here? I mean, considering what former President Jonathan said. And I think it ties down with the issue that I really think you should be raising, because the whole gathering in Accra is around the crisis of democracy, that democracy is not delivering the expectations of the people. And in Nigeria, if you take the statistics from 1999 to date, that's about 25 years. If you take the indices of development, whether you are taking the paternal and maternal mortality rates, or if you are taking the if you are taking the GDP, the growth in the economy, if you are taking all the indices of development that you take, you will see that from 1999 to date, we have been going down the drain. In fact, the GDP for this year is said to be much lower, actually about less than half of what it was in 1960. In other words, this country, under this democracy, is actually going down the drain. And it is time to really ask, of what use, of what benefit is democracy if it cannot really deliver? Is democracy made for the people or people for democracy? If democracy is supposed to serve society, then it has failed in Nigeria. And it is time to start thinking of how do we really bring about a system that can work for us. I watched the debate from beginning to the end, and I was saddened by the fact that the elite that gathered there could not think out of the a box of Western frame of thinking. In other words, they were all, and especially the guest speaker himself, he was going round and round while admitting the failure of democracy. He was still saying that we should stick to democracy. And that doesn't make sense. I mean, you have admitted that this system has failed to deliver. And you are saying that we should still hang on to it.
If it makes sense, one way out, is it no good? Why would not throw away or do away with it? Anyway, that's where we are now as a people. We are the crossroads. I've always said it. Whether we like it or not, whether we change or not, is here. This is the time. At the end of this decade, Nigeria will not remain the same again. That I am 100% sure. We are not going to be now. How we go end up, it's all up to us. So here we are as January. What will be today's date? 16th January 2026. And far as Nigeria is concerned, the country of about 250 million people, give and take, the world just becomes smaller. The world is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller for us Nigerians. In other words, the world is closing up on us, even as we expand in numbers. Think about the timeline, for instance. It started with a whisper, country of no of a particular concern. Abi, that's why they phrase the grammar. Country of a particular concern. Why our leaders are busy framing whatever our problem is as democracy that is our fault. Our democracy is dying. Our democracy don't die. Our standard of living has gone beyond what it was in 2009. 1960 and it's all democracy fault. That's what the opposition's people are taking to market come 2027. So from the country of a particular concern, then that whisper, that idea, whatever the term that's to be, becomes something more, not just physical now, louder than of more louder than we can even hear any other thing. Christian genocide, right? On Christmas Day, why the Nigerian people, especially those in Sokoto, are busy dreaming of what to eat tomorrow, the next day, because that's the reality of the majority of Nigerians. Why the likes of, superpowers, Elon Musk, they go wake up, they think about how do we not just solve problems, but how do we explore, how do we leave this planet and go to other place? Majority of what Nigerians wake up and eyes fixed on what are we going to eat. But while that dream was going on Christmas Day in Sokoto, Tomahawk missiles were crisscrossing the air, were lighting up the sky pretty much. The US call it a gift to protect Christians. The Nigerian government call it a coordinated cooperation. Eh, this part alone, it will become a big conversation in the future. It depends on how the decade ends. But Nigerian government call it a coordinated operation. So they coordinated with the Washington DC, who choose to give a special gift to the Christian. It was a gift to the Christian, but that gift came. I don't know if it was a gift. Is it a gift from Washington DC now or a gift from Asu Rock? Because it's a joint effort. Anyway, that will let for our future generation to define as literally the problem we are creating for the next generation. Since we are scared to confront the reality, we will keep out. When the time reach, they'll open the pen and they'll have a compilation of it. Then we'll put on the center stage where were we, what were we doing, what is our contribution to that coordination. Though you could almost hear the teeth grinding in Abuja across the Atlantic. And now the total ban from particular concern to gift on Christmas Day to now a total ban. The lawyers call it a presidential proclamation. That's what the lawyer will call it. But to the average village people, to which we belongs to, majority of Nigerians, I don't know if that's how they will say it. But for the students in Lagos with admission letter, and those on a grammar for Enugu, Asaba, Maiduguri, who are waiting to see their grandchildren them or their doctors in Atlanta, Houston, New York. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, to disappoint you. It ain't gonna happen. Last now, Uzo Abi, we are having this conversation here a couple of days ago about who this visa ban affects. I say, you know what? Not them, not really us. An average Nigerian man wake up high in Kuti Nigeria is not necessarily the number one thing on his own mind. So now minority 0.000.1% of Nigerians and then they live that life, who have extended family outside the country, America in particular. So the B visa ban, as of January, as of January, the B visa are gone, the F visas are gone, are paused. Even the green card are on an adjudicative hold. Okay, well, the lawyers. A fancy way to say, don't hold your breath. Because you might not be able to hold it for too long before you go. In other words, don't be too in a hurry, or you might not get to where you are going. But so let's look at the game being played. Washington is using the Christian genocide as narrative like a hammer. That is the whole sledgehammer Christian genocide. They're saying we will protect your people if you want, but we are locking the door until you do. And what is Nigerian government doing? I don't know. They are busy buying lobbyists, bribing people. Just bribe people to go and talk. Isn't that's a fucking business to venture into? Just have a lobby office in Abuja, you know. One day, all this small country, where would they oppress? Then say we'll call lobby us, we'll talk to our friend for Asurok. Oh my word. That's pretty much what you are paying. Paying $9 million to please I beg. Just go talk to your guy. Talk to your friend. Say, don't be so the story be. You know. That's not the reality. Just anyway, I'm on a hustle. So I ain't gonna spoil the lobbyist hustle. So what is the government of Nigeria doing as they don't squeeze them now? Yeah. Tinubu, we never see him since this year. The fact that Nigerians are not talking about it means that the elite who literally control what we talk about are on the known and they are cool with it. Because now them, Bola Tinubu they speak for. Bola Tinubu is not really negotiating for himself and his family. The 9 billion is not coming from his pockets. Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's not even coming from Nigerian purse. But again, that's subject to argument, right? The elite, those who, especially those who have their life pretty much tucked outside of the country in America, to be precise, from New York to Atlanta to Florida to California to Houston, Dallas to Nebraska to you name it. We are all our words are stuck everywhere by few individuals. Those are the people who are pressurizing Tinubu to, you know, to take the route that is taking. Has nothing to do with every Nigerian. So, I mean, some are saying it's 44.5 million. So, whatever million it is, just if you invest that money, maybe you put it into the master plan that Gumi is suggesting. I think Donald Trump and co will not have time to come and light up our sky. Literally, if they put that money for the Marshall Plan. Oh, what a time. What a fucking time. What a time to be alive. I envy the future generation that will research this our foolishness. They will, I mean, if to say that the thing was, if to say the thing is only on black and white, say everything that is happening, the only way to document it is just to write it down. Might not be that funny. But for the fact that, they will see the visual, the audio, every video playing out, I mean, that would be the comedy. I think they will see us as a comedian. That's the only way. I think that's the only way they can literally just say, okay, this era, like just comic, just target the comic era of the nation state, the nationhood, part of our history. Because yes, it's just fucking ridiculous things that are happening in real time too. That's what even make it ridiculous. So they are paying that much to tell the Americans that it is not just a religious war, that it's bandit, it's climate change, it's complicated. Whoa, just it's just not, it's impossible to take us serious. It's just fucking impossible. So it's just to let the US know that dropping missile on our soil. Now we get it, soil. This is their colony anyway. So what the heck? Anyway, so here we are. Nigerian sovereignty is at stake. A sovereignty that was negotiated in the 60s among the three greedy, foolish tribes. Now we have to now negotiate again along religious line. Just make it make sense. What will the future generation negotiate with? Our grandparents negotiated with their tribe that clout their judgment to wear their pride as a cloth, ego. They were all snitching on each other in order to stay ahead, dying and whining with the people that they're supposed to be negotiate, fighting to make sure they don't even stand a chance to negotiate. But no, they lost that leverage because every tribe believed that they are ought to be the pilot of the new state that is being given to them. What a shame. Here we are today. We will negotiate with the type of gods that we pray to. I wonder what our future generation will negotiate with. I don't know. Their life, because they are going to have useless generation in their millions, hundreds of millions. Maybe now then they will ship go mass to go work. By the time we clock 400 or 500 million as a people, we're at least half of those people being useless in the sense that they are healthy, they are intelligent, but there's nothing for them to do. They're just not just useless to themselves, but the entire society. Because whatever you think they can do, there are robots there who can do it better. But guess what? Maybe we get to a point they might be needed in Mars. Maybe by that time, Elon Musk will finally colonize Mars, and they will ship us again like they did likely 200 years ago. Those generations go mad. They have nothing to do here. So what's the point of roaming around for just making life a living here for the other people who are productive? Get the fuck out of here. Ship you go mad. Maybe that's because that's what they are going to negotiate with again. So it's high stake trade, Nigerian sovereignty for American protection. At what cost? We're giving our liberty away, freedom away bit by bit in the name of what protection? They're protecting themselves, protecting ourselves from ourselves. That's literally what it is. The US want the data, they want vetting, and they want results they can show to an evangelical base back home. Nigeria just wants to keep its seat at the table without losing its house. If we even have a house that we can call our own first, then before we're thinking of not losing it. You want to have a seat at the table. What table? The table that seated all the nations of the world has been destroyed, or it's currently been destroyed. So here's the reality. So the question isn't what next. The question is, in a world of guns blazing diplomacy, who is actually being protected? And who is just being policed? So this is where we are. They can frame it as failure of democracy, corruption, whatever they want to frame it as. It's a free world. But it's either we face it now or the next generation we start from this our foolishness. Do, 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 do. So they can come to you and tell you how they will need to change Nigeria from production to consumption, how we need to be prudent with our resources, how we need to grab it and run with it. However, they will come until they begin to come to you with what is actually at the cross of the issue, which is where the superiority of each tribe, and most importantly, as at today, the kind of God or which God do you pray to. So either way, until we overcome these two, we ain't going nowhere. Until we confront our tribe and religion, we go there. And we are not special. There are a lot of other nations today who were at this junction that we find ourselves. They overcame. So if China can overcome, think I can say that too about us. Question is, let's listen to lessons of history.
That is the key to a Chinese sense of history. The most important things in the Chinese heritage position. When you're united, you can do all sorts of things. When you're divided, there's chaos.
Meet Wong Gongwu, a Singapore-based professor and world-renowned expert on China history. He studied in the UK and has taught in Malaysia, Singapore and Australia. The professor shared how Chinese history still shapes modern leaders' thinking, how choosing between the American and Soviet models influenced China's future, and why many Chinese accept fewer freedoms in exchange for stability and growth. I'm Mark Chernov, your insider to Global Life. So, speaking of China today, what's the biggest misconceptions about China in the world right now? And what do we know, maybe the second part, what do we have to know about Chinese history to understand China and Chinese foreign affairs right now?
I think we have to go back a little bit to say that by 1900 or so, the Chinese elites had become aware, especially after their defeat by the Japanese in the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894. By 1900 or so, they were more or less aware that Chinese empire, the Qing Empire, Chinese civilization itself was under threat, whether they could survive or not. So by the time they created the Republic of China, the first revolution, there was a political revolution out with the dynasties, setting up a republic, the model of which was France and the United States. No monarchy, a president, a republic, and we would become a nation state. They had already decided they would become a kind of nation state, but inheriting the borders of the Qing Empire as China. I would say that the revolution was unsuccessful. All that happened was the country was divided into different warlords, and for about 15 years, the warlords were fighting each other to become the president of China. It became primarily a war between the nationalists and the communists, a civil war in which the Soviet Union was, at least under Stalin, giving some support to the Chinese Communist Party, and the Americans and the British were supporting the nationalists. The Russians took over Manchuria. They took over all the Japanese arms and factories and everything. They used that to help the Chinese Communist Party. And it is from Manchuria that they finally started their victory southwards into China. So when you look at it that way, the Chinese situation was one of how do you save in the middle of all that? And the nationalists were never really had a chance. By the time the nationalists set up their government in 1928, the Japanese were already challenging the nationalists to join them to fight the communists. And Chiang Kai-shek knew what the Japanese wanted. They had taken Manchuria. They set up Manchukuo as a vassal state of the Japanese, really a puppet of the Japanese. And you hear the Manchukuo. And so Manchuria was already Japanese. And they were marching down from Manchuria. And so Chiang Kai-shek was aware that what the Japanese really wanted was to dominate China. In the name of fighting the communists together, they were really dominating, wanting to take over China. So Chiang Kai-shek did not want to start a war with Japan because he didn't want to fight Japan when the communists were still fighting them. He wanted to concentrate on fighting the communists. So you can see all that made the Chinese people all feel that China was in grave danger of disappearing altogether. And the Chinese civilization was already out of date, completely obsolete, and we have to learn from the West. Who decided that they would learn from the West is hard to pin down. Many people were advocating it, but how much of the West to learn was always a matter of debate. And then, of course, this is something where people forget. As far as the Chinese were concerned, there were two Wests. Both were West. One West was facing the Pacific, the United States representing the West, the Anglo-American power. The other West was socialism of the Soviet Union. That was also the West. Because in the eyes of the Westerners, of the Americans, so the Soviet Union is Asiatic. It's not European.
Somewhere in Asia.
It's not genuine Asia. So they always think that the Russians and the Chinese are more or less alike because they're Asiatic, but which is nonsense. What the Russians inherited was straight out of Karl Marx and Enlightenment French philosophy. And the Chinese recognized that. They had a choice. If we are going to westernize in order to modernize, which one do you choose? And the nationalists chose the one with the Anglo-Americans who are already controlling the seaports. And the Chinese communists who are inland turned to the Soviet Union. But they were both openly saying, we must learn from the West. So there was only, to them, each one has only one West. West 1 and West 2, but each one chose only one West.
So that was the notion. So like China was losing its identity.
Yes, they were willing to give it up to save China. And one will learn from the capitalists and one will learn from the socialists. And the question is, which one will win? Then we have to fight each other. But at the same time, of course, you can say that among the majority of the ordinary people who were not ideological and didn't find all this very meaningful to them, they were very traditionalist, and they still had very old-fashioned ideas of what is the heritage, the Confucian values, the family values, the peasant values of a peasant rural society. And that rural economy was still fundamentally what China was about. It was a peasant economy. And that is why in the end Mao Zedong succeeded. In 1945, when the nationalists, backed by the Americans, defeated Japan and became the legitimate government of China, that they should lose to the communists. I think everybody was surprised. Why did they lose? So we look back, they were corrupt. They completely failed to, by their corruption and their failure to solve some of fundamental economic problems, they caused a terrifying inflation comparable to that of Germany after the First World War. Then as a result of which, everybody was poor. So poor, struggling to survive the whole of China. And the people were no longer supported that regime. So when the war was actually fought on the battlefields, the morale of the troops could not be relied on. And in the end, the communists, as they won in Manchuria and they pressed down, they were in a much more triumphant position, and they kept on winning. And before they know it, they reached the Yangtze, and Nanjing was open to the communist victory. And by 1949, almost within a year or two of arriving at the Yangtze River, it was over. Then the Chiang Kai-shek had to escape to Taiwan. And then, bit by bit, the Communist Party took over the rest of China, took over Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia. Mongolia they didn't touch because Mongolia...
You see, the civil war within the Chinese the disagreement for everything that they went through that caused them backwardness, everything that we used to refer to, was along economic line. Do we go the Soviet communist way or go the West led by American capitalist way? And eventually, one of them lost. The communists lost, right? So, but in the Nigerian situation, the fight is along civilization, religious line, tribal line, not economy. We are not even there yet. That's why the economy they suffer. So you see the difference. We are still, that's why they call those three big tribes foolish tribes. They are still fighting for what doesn't has nothing to do with how the nation should even exist, survive. Then here comes another layer of religious line. See why the generation that will actually give us the Nigeria we want are not yet born.
Had already gained its independence with Russian support and so on. But the rest of China, so within 4 or 5 years, that Communist Party under Mao Zedong had actually unified all of China. And that is the key to a Chinese, you can say, a Chinese sense of history. The most important things in the Chinese heritage, that there's only one China, only one sun in the sky, only one China. It must be united, and that is the ideal position. When you're united, you can do all sorts of things. When you're divided, there's chaos.
Yeah.
So this is security and safety, stability versus chaos, rebellion, and poverty. Sovereignty based on the borders, which is a modern concept, became now the fundamental and the foundations of a new China. And that new China was now united under one leadership, the Chinese Communist Party. And I don't mean Mao, the Chinese Communist Party, the head of which is Mao. And so the Chinese Communist Party, in that sense, in the eyes of the ordinary people, could be said to have the legitimate emperor of China. They had taken over. It's like a new China, I think a new dynasty called the Chinese Communist Party. And this is what is still there. This is what made China successful, even after the terrible mistakes that Mao Zedong made in the Cultural Revolution that damaged the economy and caused a tremendous hardship to vast numbers of people, Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution. Despite all that, they survived all that, and Deng Xiaoping came up and opened up, but not entirely, but opened up enough to learn from the capitalism on the basis of a very Marxist argument that unless you have capitalism, you can't have socialism. It's in that order. You try and skip capitalism to move from a feudal peasant society to socialism was not what Marx talked about. Capitalism was actually an essential part of it all. And to put it very simply, capitalism knows how to make money. Wealth can be created through capitalism. Nothing wrong with that. And only when you have that wealth can you have socialism. Because what do you distribute if you don't have wealth? You redistribute wealth. That is socialism. But you must get the wealth first. So Deng Xiaoping's kind of logic was going back to Marx to say, we have to go through this capitalist stage. And we will go through it. And then when we have succeeded, and China is prosperous, then we can really have socialism. And then socialism, but then with Chinese characteristics. And that's quite important, because the Chinese characteristics part means that you're not just copying somebody else's thing. You're still distinctively and identifiably, recognizably Chinese that you can still be proud of. It's still part of the tradition. And it's not just a kind of show. It is meaningful, because you look at it, you say that liberal democracy through kind of elections of the United States doesn't suit China, because it is essentially allowing the capitalists to run the elections, and it's money politics that determines that liberal democracy, that it's an extreme form of money politics, which doesn't match the Chinese idea of what a good government is. A good government is a caring government. A caring government consisting of people who are trained dedicated, chosen by performance, a kind of meritocracy, to become a mandarinate, whether you call it a mandarin or a party cadre, but a mandarinate who have been promoted gradually by performance and ability to rise to the top and to care for the country, all serving the people. You know, wei renmin fu wu, to serve the people. It's very traditional, because the traditional idea of the Son of Heaven, who has the mandate of heaven, is someone, a ruler, who cares for the people. And so as long as he cares for the people will love you in return and respect you in return and support you. When you stop caring for the people, they will rebel against you and overturn the dynasty and produce a new dynasty. So these are the kind of, you might say, inherited political norms which they found had worked for so long. That's something we should think about. Why should we go through this every 4 years, picking somebody who never had any political or administrative experience just because he's popular or he's got money behind him and he wins? That's not the way we want to go. This is how they may exaggerate and overstate the position. But their idea is that we don't want to go in that direction. Our direction is towards a caring government who actually can show and perform and actually produce a society that is more stable, more secure, more safe, more harmonious. And that's the idea we want. And any government that actually is dedicated to that and very well-disciplined ruling elite, we can accept that. So the idea that we must have 4 years elections and regular sort of change of government and two-party systems and so on, fighting each other all the time, is to them is advances, as it were. It's too much politics all the time. Whereas this is a different kind of politics, the politics of management and administration and demonstration of performance that helps the people get better lives and more peaceful lives. That kind of politics is administrative politics, you might say, as compared to party politics, campaign politics, electoral politics, and money politics. That's how they would see the world now divided. And here is a world in which that model has been set on, given to everybody. And what a mess it has created in most countries. And there's enough proof to say that that system has not worked very well in most countries.
Some people, maybe some more West-oriented people, would argue, yes, but are people like restricted, like feel restricted and feel like very controlled living in China?
I think they are quite right, that people are under control. They don't have the freedoms that shared in the West. And so, but what the Chinese, how the Chinese would position it is that actually, as long as you're just doing what you are supposed to do, you are free. Nobody bothers you. The only thing that you are not free to do is to say what you like about politics. That's the only thing that is not free. And that in broad sense, that is probably true. Normally what you do, who bothers what you do? In fact, if you look at the things that the Chinese people do, a lot of petty crimes, corruption, a lot of abuse, and abuse of wives, abuse of children, and all kinds of things. That's just like any other society. I mean, they're not that different. The Chinese Communist Party can't stop that, and they don't prevent anything. That's not what the point is. What they are preventing is that if you're against a party, you're against the stability of a system which must be disciplined to show that they are doing good. So if you're preventing, if you're going against us, that you are not free to do. But in your lives, they can't be bothered. If you ask the Chinese people, they're actually totally free in their ordinary lives. It's only when you want to talk politics, you want to say, I don't like Mr. Xi Jinping, you cannot say that. Not in public anyway. You can say that in private, but you can't say that, you can't go to print on that. But so now in social media and so on, you can't do that. You do it in social media, immediately that is blocked. That is the one thing that they definitely don't have, and the West is quite right to say that they don't have to. But to most Chinese people, that's actually not terribly important, because not everybody is interested in just scolding the leaders and saying rude things about politicians and so on. Because in many ways, if you look at electoral politics, you can say it's actually a good show. It's like watching a football game, or they're fighting each other, calling each other names, and you win election every year. Somebody's winning and losing. It's like watching a football game. At the end of it all, somebody wins, somebody draws, somebody loses, and it's quite entertaining sometimes. It can be also very distressful, but it can be very entertaining at other times. Because you just say, oh, I don't like him and he lost. Good. So my favorite club is this one. My side is, he won. Good. So everybody's happy. But is it that important to everybody? Who knows? I mean, so in one society you say that is very important. The most important thing is the freedom of speech and the right to vote. And the other side says, is it true? Is that true? Do we feel that is absolutely necessary? Actually, I'm not so sure that the Chinese that ordinary Chinese people are that concerned with that particular part. What they're concerned about, can I make money? Can I be richer, better off? Can I have a better house? Can I find a wife? Today there are millions of Chinese males without wives because the male-female ratio, because of the one-child policy, a lot of the girls are aborted and the boys came out. So there's a ratio, there's a big gap. So there are millions of men who cannot find their wives. That's miserable. But that has nothing to do with it was a policy mistake by Deng Xiaoping himself, the one-child policy. But they made it at a time for the best of intentions. But it went wrong. They were just totally miscalculated. They got it wrong. But they had good intention. They wanted to do that so that the standard of living could be better. If it too many children, they couldn't see how they could actually satisfy the population. They thought they were doing the right thing. They kept it for too long. So the Chinese have faced many, many problems. But those problems, to think that the only problem is freedom, I think it's oversimplifying. And you keep on saying you're scolding them for not having that. Of course that is true. But actually that's not that bad. If you're not interested in politics, it doesn't bother you. You go to the movies, you go to watch shows, watch sports, celebrations of this kind, the other, travel. They travel around the world and they all go home. They don't stay abroad. There's no had to run away or to escape from China. They have a very good time. The tourists here, all over Southeast Asia, in Europe, in America, and not so much now, but in Europe, not so much now, but they have a very good time buying new things, seeing Europe, visiting all the historical sites.
What are the other misconceptions about China in the so-called West? What people in the West, maybe who never been to China or who only read the articles from CNN, BBC, don't understand, don't get about China?
I think the Chinese themselves, I think, are very divided on that. I can't be sure about what the young Chinese generation really feel, because they have their problems. They have a lot of graduate unemployment. I mean, partly because their graduate education system was so successful. So many people went to universities, and some of them very hardworking and very bright. They graduate. If you start producing 9 million graduates per year, or nowadays more than 10 million graduates per year, how do you find 10 million jobs, new jobs for a graduate every year, a new job? So it's a problem. So many of them are really quite disappointed and unhappy. I have heard from young people, some of them who are visiting here in Singapore, and others you read about, who do feel that it was all waste of their energy and time, pointless, and they're very disillusioned. So there's all that. But do they hanker after the freedom of the West? I'm not sure. Do they believe that if they had freedom in political parties and elections, then everything would be okay? I'm not sure. So I cannot predict what will happen. All I can say is that China is not a simple place. It's a very big country and there are lots and lots of people. How do you control that? And the different provinces are very different. In fact, it's not like the United States at all. In the United States, probably it can be divided into about 2 or 3 parts. But China actually can be divided into about 20 different provinces. And each province is like a country for a long time because they are very big. I mean, some of those provinces are bigger than the largest country in Europe, except Russia. I mean, for example, I think the province of Henan is more populated than the whole of Germany. It has about 100 million people, one province, and even others, 70, 80 million, very common. That's bigger than most countries of Europe, and just one province. So you have a central government trying to run all these on one principle. It's not really possible. They have to allow for differences and so on. And the central government does do that. In some ways, it's a sort of semi-federal system without the right to secede. But it's federal in the sense that each party secretary appointed to a province is given quite a lot of leeway to develop the best possible way he can to make the province prosperous. And if you succeed, you get promoted, so you have every incentive to succeed. So people are doing that. So the provinces compete against each other. I mean, in manufacturing, for example, some successful product, everyone does it, and then they overproduce. Happens all the time. Same with housing, cars, or whatever they do, whatever they make, it very quickly overproduce because they don't have enough consumers themselves. They are all depending on selling and exporting it in the globalized capitalist market. That Deng Xiaoping said we must have capitalism, we must take advantage of the liberal capitalist economy for China to flourish. So if the liberal West fails, they'll cost them. They have to pay a price too. So they don't want the West to fail. They actually don't want to. This is a paradox. They want the West to succeed, to buy their goods. And of course, the American people are having a bad Christmas now because they can't afford the toys. I mean, the tariffs and so on. In the past, they were very cheap, all made in China. All the factories went there, made in China. And the American people benefited for last 30 years. They have their cheap goods made in China. And now when all the factories are gone, they blame China for everything they lost. It's not that, it's the capitalists who made that decision. It's not China didn't cheat them. The capitalists made more money than ever from moving their factories to China. So the rich got all that much richer. But then the middle class stagnated, the poor people lost their jobs, the factories are all gone, no more unemployment everywhere. So the America pays a price. But the consumer benefited tremendously. Everything was cheap. And now, of course, they're having to sort that one out. But then the Chinese are also suffering from that. Because once you have they can't sell, they're producing as much as ever, but the market is not there. And their own consumers don't have the money, don't have enough money to consume it all. So you can see that so many paradoxes and contradictions that both countries, both these so-called superpowers, both of them are facing enormous contradictions and that they had never faced before, at least not for a long time.
Yeah, I guess what you don't want is to oversimplify things. That people tend to do. It's easier, say China is this, America is this.
Yeah, well, I think that's quite what politicians do. They want to simplify so that the ordinary man can vote for him. So he's got to say that that's evil, we are good, very easy. So that kind of politics doesn't exist in China. I mean, at least they don't need it because the Chinese people don't really have that choice anyway. So as far as they're concerned, China is being contained, squeezed and bullied here and there, and everything is demonized. China's been demonized, and that's how it's presented and that's how they see it. They can pick up what is available, CNA and all that. The Chinese are so good. The young Chinese, they can pick it up on the social media. Whatever is available in the Western press, they can pick it up. So they know what the West is saying about them, and some of it they know is not true. So they're using these lies to find excuses to blame everything on us. It's not so simple that America's all bad. That's also the same. When they picture America as just all corrupt and money politics, everything is all for bullying other people and trying to dominate the world and be hegemonic in every attempt, interfering with everybody's business when it's none of their business. That picture of America has also been overstated. There's some truth in it, but it's overstated. And you can exaggerate to the point that they are the enemy.
So what do you think the biggest shifts are happening with America, with the United States right now?
At the moment, I think they are so divided that I don't see how their democracy can really function properly. Because my understanding of democracy is that democracy works best when the majority are moderate and in fact disagree only on certain certain principles and details of policies, but disagree on certain things. But they're basically moderate and they're willing to work with each other and have a kind of shared views about basic things. And you keep the extremists on one side, the other extremists on the other side, but as small minorities. The majority are in the middle. Then the democracy works because you elect people who are one party or the other. They are different, but they're not that different. The difference between a Democrat and a Republic is very hard to put on a piece of paper. Just like in Britain, between the Tories and the Liberals in the past, the Whigs and the Tories in England, it's very hard to tell the difference between the two. All of them graduate from Oxford anyway, or something. So when people are moderate in that way, they can actually talk to each other and discuss and find a common policy for the good of the country. That democracy works. What has happened, what I see now, is that there's almost nothing in between. There's no moderate. The moderate is so small. It's either way or that way, and they don't talk to each other. They see each other as the enemy, and then it doesn't work. It's a matter of winner takes all, and if I win, you can do nothing. I do everything. So that someone like Trump can be a president who can say what he likes, does what he likes, because there's no real opposition that can stop him. So there's no moderation. He can say one thing, he can be very reasonable and be totally unreasonable. It doesn't really matter. So because he knows he has one half of the population, or roughly 40% of the population, are more or less guaranteed to support. That's what he thinks anyway. So as long as he thinks like that, and it's more or less like that, then you don't have a democracy. So as long as you keep your 40%, and not everybody votes in America, you win. And so if that continues, I really wonder how that democracy will work. How do you stop that? In American history, the closest they got to that was the Civil War in the 1860s, when Abraham Lincoln fought the war over the issue of slavery, and it was also a constitutional debate between the North and the South. And millions died to find an answer to that. But of course, that in the extreme, they just broke out, completely broken. It was sort of different in region. This time it's not quite so clear cut, but there's a bit of that. But the fact is that maybe they know how to avoid it now. They find some compromise. But at the moment, it doesn't look as if the two-party system can really bring about a kind of national consensus that both sides can genuinely and legitimately support. And at the moment, it's either one or the other. So how do you get that system to gain the credibility of people respecting it and believing it that it's a good system that will be good for everybody, that the world needs? At the moment, I would say more and more people are less and less convinced that the Americans can provide the kind of leadership they once had. I can't think of any large group of people who really believe that America still has the right to tell the world what to do. And that was something they had about 20 years ago when they won the war against the Soviet Union. They thought they really could tell the world what was right and wrong. And it didn't work. On the contrary, wherever they intervened, they failed. Look at the way they intervened in North Africa, in Tunisia, in Libya, and so on. And then they went to Syria, they went to Middle East, they went to Iraq and Afghanistan. Everything they touched didn't succeed by intervening, telling you what is good for you. They're not allowing you to do anything they don't like. They say you can't do that. And then using military means to advance your interest. But it didn't succeed. All of them failed. In fact, the situation was worse before you intervened. Look at Iraq today, look at Afghanistan today. Is it better than the Iraq before 2002? I mean, I don't know. So where is the credibility of this superpower? number one superpower. So I think these are probably more permanent than we like to believe. That loss of credibility, and added to that, a loss of confidence on the part of the Americans. I feel that the American leadership don't have that kind of confidence they used to have, when they were so sure their intentions were good, they meant well, they were trying to save the world, they were trying to bring peace and happiness to everybody, prosperity and so on. Actually, they believed it for a long time. They believed it. Now, I'm not sure that the Americans themselves believe that. And if they don't believe it, who else will believe them?
What are the other big shifts that you see in the world, like tectonic changes that are happening in the world right now?
Let me say that I think there is a question of where people continue to make decisions despite the fact that they know that the world has changed, and they make it according to their national interest alone, then I think the world is in big trouble. Everybody working only for their national interest, I think then we are heading towards something that would completely undermine the kind of stability that we have been used to for so long. You just say, this is my interest, and whatever you are doing is against my interest. I have to fight for my own interest. Then I think the road is a very slippery one towards total disorder. But I'm not that pessimistic. I'm a natural optimist. So I do feel that there are ways where the top leaders in the world can be rational and work out compromises. And one of the things that does look possible is that, and if I'm correct, both the United States and the Chinese don't want to fight. They would avoid war at all costs. Let us make that assumption. If you start with that assumption, which I have reason to believe is reasonable assumption, if you start with that assumption, I would say there are possibilities for working out a system whereby you continue to contend through economic competition. You contend to technological competition. You challenge each other to be better and produce a richer economy, more successful one, and people are better off. And everybody knows that you are better off and you are losing ground on that one. That will satisfy me. Both sides work towards improving their economic conditions and technological superiority, and or at least equality, to be able to continue to survive confidently, because they're not getting poorer and they're not getting weaker, but they're still capable of competing almost on equal terms in terms of economy and technology, science and technology. I think it is possible to envisage that kind of world appearing when both sides say, if we're not going to war, this is the way we will fight. We will fight on economy and technology. We will compete, and I will defeat you, and I'll be better than you. You will have to acknowledge that you always have to be a position lower than mine. That will satisfy me. And if both sides can work towards that end, you could have peace for a long time. No guarantee there'll be forever, but at least you overcome this period when there's such a sense of insecurity and fear, especially when it's a fear and insecurity growing in the number one superpower. When the number one superpower is no longer confident, that is the danger. It's become very dangerous. But if I'm right in saying dangerous but not going to war, they don't think a military solution will solve anything. So in that case, if we avoid that, how do we do that? So you can use, as they're still doing now already, using allies and partners or whatever, they use the terminology differently, but they use them to ensure that there's a kind of economic balance, making sure that neither is over too much, too powerful. And if they can feel reasonably confident that neither side will be overwhelmingly powerful, they could long time with each other for a long time.
Will they? That said you more about life in China?
I think because the leaders may, if they once agree, they're not going to fight. If they really think, definitely rule out fighting. I mean, they won't say it publicly, but both sides are agreed, and they are making that crucial foundation for all their policies. It's not, we're not going to go to war. If you take that as a beginning, then all the others are negotiable. There's room for finding ways whereby we can compete. If we can show that I'm competing, I'm not giving in to you, but neither side will give in, I'm going to do this, you're better than that, I'm trying to catch up, you're better than this, I'll catch up. And both sides are doing that. And in the meantime, benefiting the rest of the world, because as they compete, they're actually trying to win friends, among others, to their support, to support their economies, to share the kind of gains that they would make in the economic and technological world. It is possible. If you minimize the politics, not to make politics everything. Everything is political. Everything is military and political. Win and it's winner takes all. It's a zero-sum game kind of thing. If you remove your framework from that zero-sum game set of calculations, there are many other possibilities. And I think in the economic and technological areas, there's room to be competitive, to be fiercely, even nationalistic, without endangering the world, with the world order. Because in the nationalistic terms of economic competition is much safer than in other areas, in technological terms even. As long as it's not aimed entirely in political and military supremacy. So I think that's what I at least I think it's possible, and I don't think you should rule it out. At least this is in my mind.
Yeah. Some people say if the war can start if China invades Taiwan. Do you think it will ever happen?
I don't actually believe that the Chinese want to take Taiwan by force, because they don't want to just kill a lot of Chinese. Why have to do that? What they really want to do is to be absolutely sure that Taiwan will not allow itself to be used as a base to attack China. I mean, that's what they want to be sure of, that the Taiwanese will never be an ally of the enemy, like Japan or United States. If Taiwan and the Taiwanese are not stupid, and the Taiwanese leaders, I think amongst them, they're also aware of that if they can continue to do well economically and technologically and never show enmity towards the PRC, and are prepared to talk and discuss matters of common interest, but without giving up their friends like Japan or United States, but not expecting to be allies of them if they came into a conflict with China, and not be used by them as a base for attacking China. If all this somehow could be assured to the government in Beijing, I think they can live with the status quo for a long, long time. Because then it's in principle, except the fact that the Republic of China is also China. There's only one China, but they argue about which China, but the Republic of China is also China. You are People's Republic, we are Republic, but we are China. Different China happen to be under two, but we're not enemies. The Civil War is over. We're not going to fight anymore. Is it possible? I think it's possible. But if there's any question of people like Senator Pelosi visiting the Taiwanese and inviting the Taiwanese to the same, and generally pretending that Taiwan is an independent state and treating it like that, that is provocative. So I would say that that's why the Chinese are deeply insecure about and dislike is what the provocative act and Taiwan is treating Taiwan like an independent state, completely separate from the PRC. Not China anymore. There are two China in that sense, and that this other China is pro-America and pro the West, and supported by the whole West. All that, of course, China would not accept. So, can that be avoided? I don't know, but I wouldn't rule it out completely. I can't see that everybody would want to work so hard to treat Taiwan as an independent nation and work for Taiwan to be a member of the United Nations or something like that. is committed to the idea of one China anyway, theoretically, except for about 20 countries or less than 20 now, committed to the idea of one China. So if you follow these things logically and legally as well, it is possible to get to a compromise that doesn't entirely satisfy everybody, but good enough to cause the case of peace and change the condition that make people said, secure and
politicians, celebrities, investors on this channel for the last 3 years, and many of them became my friends. Some even bought my service.
a condition that makes people said, secure and feel safe, and nobody gets killed.
I interviewed numerous billionaires. Why Taiwan is so important for China? Let's say there are so many Chinese people, ethnically Chinese, living in Indonesia, for example. But there are no problem with Indonesia, I guess.
Well, no, but that's because Taiwan was always part of China as far as the Chinese are concerned. That was in the map of China. The map of China that the PRC inherited in 1949 includes Taiwan. And the Taiwanese agreed with that. Taiwanese always said there was one China. Just that their one China is in Taipei. Capital is Taipei. And in the United Nations, there was only one China. Even when the General Assembly voted for the PRC to be admitted to the United Nations, they could have admitted two Chinas. They could have said, all right, you give the Security Council position to the PRC as a member. It could have happened. I know it didn't happen. The Americans actually offered the nationalists, the RC in Taiwan, to support them, or to vote for this as a United Nations. And Chiang Kai-shek said, no, there's only one China. Chiang Kai-shek died, it continued to the end of the century, and under the Kuomintang. That was the position they took. They were the China. That's not a China. So, since 1945, in fact, since Taiwan became officially a province of China in 1880 something, it became officially a province. Before that, it was part of Fujian province. Then in 1880, it became a separate province of China. And then the Japanese took it in 1895. So it was the Japanese who took it, but it was a province. When the Japanese took it, it was known as a province that was taken, given over as a price to pay for having lost the war against Japan in 1895 in the Treaty of Shimono. That was then it began. But in 1945, it was agreed that everything that the Japanese took from China would be returned to China. Taiwan became part. Otherwise, how could Chiang Kai-shek have moved to Taiwan? So where is there any doubt? Legally, I mean, again, I talk about legally, how can there be any doubt that Taiwan is part of China? And actually, 165 countries in the world have accepted that. There's only one China. And the province, and Taiwan is a province of China.
So your identity is like Chinese, but internationally minded Chinese kind of thing?
I don't know how internationally minded I am, but let me put it this way. I do not regard national borders as being some sanctified and unchangeable. I mean, there's a legal identity, which I respect. That's all it is. It's just by law.
Yeah.
But it's got nothing to do with how I feel or who am I. It's just a legal statement saying I am a national of a certain country. So it's a legal identity. But a legal identity is just that. You can extend it to say identity. But one's identity is not purely political or legal. Social, cultural, aesthetic, moral, whatever it is, identity. And it is not, there's only one identity. Multiple identities, frankly, is a norm for everybody. I mean, you can be a Frenchman and really love English culture and so on, and you can live in France and actually everything you do but to England. And nobody, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You have a legal identity of Frenchman, but what you do and everything in your life, you want to be identified with British way of life, British literature, British theatre, British culture, and so on. I mean, just to make as an example. And it's entirely possible, particularly in Europe.
I think people sometimes confuse it because they generalize and treat ex-passport, you have a Chinese passport or German or Russian passport, meaning you are this.
This is the definition that only started in the 19th century. There was no such thing in the past,
Yes.
in the whole of mankind.
Yes.
Nobody thought like that before. But in the after the Enlightenment, when at the end of the 18th century, the idea of a citizen became the most important thing. Because before that, a country belongs to the king, or belongs to the aristocracy, or the landed property people, or the archbishop, or whoever. They are in charge. There's no such thing as a national identity. But when you're a citizen, you're a French citizen. As a citoyen, you are French. And every Frenchman is French. And so what happened was the French Empire, which started as a kind of imperial thing belonging to the king, Louis XIV, Louis XIV and his empire, that became a French national empire. Became the empire of every Frenchman. Every Frenchman now has territories that control everything. And as a concept change. Before that, an empire or a ruler, all the people in the empire, no matter what color they were, what religion they were all his subjects. But when you have a citizen, that empire can only be run by officials who are French, who are British. Nobody else can run it. But in the old days, it doesn't matter if you're subject of the emperor. You can be anybody. In the name of the emperor, be an official of the empire. But once it becomes a national empire, you can't. You have to be a Frenchman to be an official in the French territory.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference, and that's a 19th century concept.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was really disastrous for Europe, because what it ended up by being was two world wars, which destroyed them. That's what destroyed all the attempts at national empires, German, French, the British. That's how it started World War I and World War II. Russia was involved, but that was the idea of a national empire.
Yeah.
So it ended up with total destruction, end of national empires.
The concept of citizenship in Russian Empire actually, as I remember, didn't exist. So in the beginning of 20th century, for example, if you move from small town to Moscow, you could get like the paper that you belong to Moscow, to the city, but you don't belong to like Russia or to Russian Empire. Yeah, and that's why actually from Russian Empire you could go to Europe without any visa, without any documents, which now if you think about it is like strange.
Because in those days there was no such thing as nationality.
Yes, yes, and it was just 100 years ago, not so long ago.
And so that's why I say it's such a modern concept. We now take it as if it is holy writ, holy writ, you know.
Yes.
It's a nonsensical thing. It's only we're trying to understand what we mean by a nation.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, there are so many dozens or scores of versions of nation states in the world today. I have no idea how you define a nation today.
What does it mean to be Chinese?
To me, it's primarily, there are several levels which are very difficult to separate sometimes. There is the ethnic one in which other people see you as Chinese, whether you like it or not. So that's another thing. But the self part is you identify with things which you recognize as part of Chinese civilization. That is unquestionable. They can be local or borderless. For example, identify with Chinese Confucian ideas. The moral sense of the role of the family and the kind of relationships that the Chinese place such a great emphasis on, and you identify with that, that has no national borders. And you can say that's my Chinese ancestry.
Yeah.
Leads me to believe that. The Chinese are not particularly religious, so they don't actually have a single religion. But if you say, I'm a Buddhist, but I'm a Chinese Buddhist, because the practices are different from those in Burma or Thailand, then you say I'm Chinese because that's the Buddhism identify. But if that's getting it, refining it already. It's not that important, because if a Chinese who lives in Thailand, before long he's a Buddhist like any other Thai Buddhist. It doesn't matter very much. So this idea of a very fixed identity and must be narrowly defined, and so that you must be loyal to it, to absolute loyalty and so on, is a modern, intellectually narrowly defined idea which actually has no real meaning for ordinary people in their normal lives, to my mind.
Yeah, but then why countries create identity and citizenship and create ideas around it? For example, if you want people to fight for your country, you need to have a big idea and you need to persuade people to do it, right?
As I said, all this started only in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Before that, you did that because your king told you to do that, or your local feudal lord say, I need so many men to fight.
Yeah.
You have no choice. You may be a serf or a slave and so on, or you just work for your feudal lord, and he says, I got to go and fight the other feudal lord. You go into war. It's got nothing to do with nationality. Your loyalty is not even a loyalty, you just have to do it. And what we're trying to do is really a post-1945 thing, with the creation of the United Nations and the end of empires. When you say no more empires, every one of those colonies should now become independent. That was 1945 decision after the World War II. End of all those national empires. Decolonization meant the chance for all those colonies, each one of them, to be a new nation. So everybody was very happy. I was a young student at the time. We thought this was a brilliant idea. I mean, as an idea, it certainly was a wonderful idea. Completely new, first time in history. Never been defined in that way before. That the world would consist of, at that time, 120 nations, now 180 something nations.
Yeah.
All of them are equal, sovereign, with clear borders. But in our case, as a colonies, as you know, all our borders are not drawn by us. These borders are all created by the colonial powers. But who lived within those borders is a different matter. To what extent were they nationals? What kind of a nation were they? It was not their borders. Now you're telling them, these are your borders. And everybody who lives in those borders must be loyal to that country. It takes time, takes a long time. And at the time when this idea was introduced, I think most of us, young and idealistic, we didn't realize how long it would take and how difficult it could be. People look at each other, you're not quite the same as me. How can you and I be nationals of this same country? What have we got in common? Maybe we went to the same school, or maybe we lived in the same neighborhood for a while. We can speak to each other one common language, lingua franca. I speak my own language, you speak your own, but we have a lingua franca, which we talk. So we have a little bit in common, but that's only the beginnings. It takes a long time, maybe a few generations, before you feel that you can be a nation. So what happened is that we didn't have nations. What we had states. We inherited colonial states. And the states were given the responsibility of shaping that nation. So what happened was, in most countries, the people who controlled the state then decided what kind of a nation it's going to be.
Yeah.
And who deserves to be a nation, who deserves to be a national, who doesn't. The state decides, because the state controls the border legally. Again, this is a legal thing.
Yeah.
And so on. But the actual feeling of Ukraine loyalty or to fight and die of that, you have to draft him into the army to make him feel like that. You train him to shoot and kill on behalf of your country. So then you get the feeling of it, there's an enemy out there and you have no choice. He's not my national, I can kill him. But that is a matter of national policy. The state tells you who's the enemy,
Yeah.
and who are you be trained to kill, if necessary, if they attack us. So these are all new things, and we had to learn. Of course we can learn, and we have learned. Many nations have done that. But if you ask everybody within any one of these countries that in the neighborhood, are they all the same? Do they feel the same? It's still work in progress, I think. And it's something important. I actually strongly support the idea, but I think we mustn't pretend that it is all done.
Yeah.
And that's very easy.
Yeah. Hey, I've launched this Telegram channel where I'll be sharing insights from my guests, travel tips around Asia, and also my thoughts about YouTube, marketing, business, and even life. It will be cozy, personal, and free of charge. So join me, just scan this QR code on the screen or click the link in the description.
The country called Belgium, example, like colonial government.
I'll see you there. If you summarize, what's the identity of Singaporean? Like, because in Singapore is a new country, relatively. Like, what's the identity that was being shaped and created through this 60 plus years?
You see, one of the worst things that could happen to us was when all the colonies were decolonized and said that from today onwards, the imperialists will go home and you take over, it's your nation. The model that they were given were European nations. And European nations at that point were defined, especially Western Europe, where the colonial government had first started. And most of them were defined in very simple terms. The most common terms that I remember was one language, one religion, and a shared history. This is the most common thing. That was the European model. And so that meant, if you followed that model, you look around and say, who's the majority? And who are the minorities? And the minorities must all give up their own thing and become like the majority. Then we become one nation.
Yes.
But you must be like the majority. That was the British thing. For example, you give an example like, you must have one religion. You can't have two religions. Of course, it's not true. In real life, it's not like that. But that's how it was defined when you first started a nation. For example, the best example between the Dutch and the Belgium, I mean, they were Netherlands, they were part of the Spanish Netherlands. But what happened was that they speak the same language, and what happened was they didn't have the same religion. They spoke the same language, but didn't have the same religion. But they all spoke Dutch, but the Dutch became Protestants. And the Catholics, the Catholic Dutch, were then separated from the Protestants and eventually became the country called Belgium. You see what and in the case of Belgium, very complicated. The other French-speaking Catholics who were living there became Belgium. So Belgium became Dutch and French country. But they didn't have one language, but they compromised it. Religion was more important than the language. So what model should we be following as the new states should be creating? So many of the states took the model of conforming to the majority. The majority decides what is a nation to be. The rest of us must conform. Singapore, this is the exception. One of the reasons why Singapore separated, as you know, from this albatross file that is now being exhibited, which is a big story these days, that separated because there was a different understanding of what Malaya was supposed to be. The way the British understood it was there was no majority in Malaya. In Malaya, the Malays were something like just under 50%. If you include Singapore, it'd be less than 50%. So there were Chinese and Indians and others, and there's no majority. So it should be a plural society. Everybody should live together without anybody conforming to one particular ethnic group.
So it's one lingua franca, but not shared history and not shared...
No one religion.
And no one religion.
There's several religions.
Yeah.
Numerous languages. And
before, yeah, numerous.
And no
yeah.
shared history was so brief under British protection,
yes.
which is less than 50 or 60 years old. So the conditions of building a nation were, I would say, very, very poor. But anyway, that was the reason why Singapore separated, was that the Malay, they were not quite a majority, but they were still a slight majority. By keeping out Singapore, they could say they have a majority. The Malays said, these are Malay states. You guys are all immigrants, so you have to conform. So Singapore was the opposite, 75% Chinese. But how do they accept that? And there were other reasons. I won't go into the details because it's a complex story. But they separated. So Singapore's separation then was based on the idea that we are different from there. We don't expect the majority to determine the ethnicity of the nation. We accept the plural society principle. So it was unique in the region for not using the majority as a base. Otherwise, everybody should be Chinese. On the contrary, the leadership persuaded the Chinese community not to say, this is a Chinese country. This is not a Chinese country. Everybody is equal. And then they had these categories of Chinese, Indians, Malays, and others, and so on. But everybody was equal, and different religions, and so everybody keeps his own language, his own religion, and his own culture, and they're equal in the law, by law. A plural society like that, very few places in the world where you had that idea. In fact, I would say so few that none of them have been successful. Singapore, by comparison, is the most successful, if not the only successful example of a plural society, still after 60 years, still maintained as a principle of nationhood. That's most unusual, and successful in a way which I think no other country can really boast of in the same way.
I mean, there is the United States, which is like seen as an immigrant society. So different ethnicities, different religions, shared one language, and shared one history for the last like 250 years.
But then you see, in itself, there is also always the assumption that it was a white man's country.
Assumption, yeah.
Underlying it all.
Underlying, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the first immigrants were like from Britain,
the 13
from
colonies,
Dutch.
The 13 colonies in the Constitution did not apply to anybody except the white people. The Constitution did not apply to the blacks, and at that point there were only three groups in the 13 colonies: the whites, the native Indians, and the blacks. And the Constitution did not apply to the other two, only applied to the whites who defeated the English and chased the English out. So for about, even the Civil War, what was the Civil War about? It was whether the blacks are our people or not.
Yeah.
They're not slaves, you see. And after the Civil War, they took them another 100 years to Martin Luther King before they gave all of them the vote and treated them at least legally equal. Not always.
Yeah, at least legally.
Legally.
At least
It comes back to only the legal part. It's only the legal part. So even United States, can you compare with Singapore for that? I think actually Singapore is better than the United States on that one, very clearly better. Because Singapore, the law actually makes it a crime if you're rude or to show a racial discrimination in anything you do, it's against the law. And the law, as far as I know, would act very promptly about that. And therefore it minimized the whole tensions of race and so on so far anyway. It's always there. Nobody pretends that it'll go away. It'll always be there. But the management, the kind of social engineering that was set up under a very strong legal system, to some extent authoritarian system, to make sure that all these tensions would not be allowed to take over and break up the harmony of the society.
Yeah.
Then it is exceptional. As I said, I think it is unique. I can't actually think of another country which has done what the Singaporeans have done. successfully.
Yeah, because you have like some European nations like Switzerland, or like you have some Middle East countries like Dubai, like the Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. The majority is like one ethnic group, one religion, right?
They are the only citizens. The others are working there.
Yes.
And you can make as much money as you like,
Yes.
but you are never citizens. Here it's not. It was started, everybody was an equal citizen in the eyes of the law. That's it. And to preserve that, refine that, and made it more real to most of the young Singaporeans, I think it's exceptional achievement.
Do you think this setup in Singapore is fragile or is pretty stable and is pretty good?
Let's put it this way. It can be as strong as it can be if there was no interference from outside. But if powerful forces intervene and interfere, of course it is fragile because it's a small country. So depends. If powerful forces from outside leave Singapore alone, I think Singapore's chances of developing a unified idea of a Singaporean identity, which was pluralistic, is entirely possible. I think it will never be secure. It always has to be managed and carefully refined and watched and managed. It can never be taken for granted. That's why this idea of nationhood is really not a very helpful one in some ways, except that in the eyes of United Nations, we're all equal. Independent, sovereign, equal. That's the idea in the United Nations. But the United Nations doesn't actually run anything, can do anything today. If big countries intervene, United Nations can do nothing. We've seen that again and again. And it doesn't matter who the big nation is, but a big nation bullying a small nation, United Nations is pretty helpless. The only time when they intervened successfully as a United Nation was really the Korean one. And in the end, it ended up with 2 Koreas. And they're still at war. They haven't signed a peace agreement between the 2 Koreas till this day. So United Nations as an ideal, I think, is wonderful. I mean, I as someone who grew up believing in it, I regret the fact that it has no real, and we should have been more realistic, it has no real power to actually make it happen. It depends really in the end on the few great powers that have enough power to determine that. And when the great powers are in conflict or in tension and competing with one another, then who knows what they will do.
Some people think I just show up at the guest place, press record, and that's it, the video is done. But right now 6 people work full-time and 2 part-time on this project. It takes a lot of time, energy and money. Some interviews takes months to secure, but we do it because we want to show the world that Asia is a modern, exciting and inspiring place, and to introduce you to the most interesting people out there. If that resonates with you, I'd love for you to become an even bigger part of this project. By clicking the join button below, you'll become an official member and supporter of this channel. You'll get a special badge, I'll see your comments first, and you will know that you are helping us keep this going. Big hug to each of you, thank you so much for your support, and honestly, you are the best YouTube community I could ever dream of. Thank you so much. What do you understand about life from the perspective of being 95-year-old?
Well, I feel that it has been a very good century, the 20th century. The second half of the second century. The first half was terrible. The second half of the 20th century was a good time. And the beginnings of the 21st century, we thought would be even better, but it had a very bad start. Almost immediately, and a bad start, and this is why I associate it with the world order being threatened by overconfidence when the Cold War ended, because the idea that you're the #1 superpower in the world really distorted the worldview of the United States. And the triumphant approach they took led them to those interventionist wars in North Africa and the Middle East, which actually undermined that idea that the United States could provide leadership to the world. And to that extent, the millennium started in 2001 and 2 badly. And then by 2008, the American economy was beginning to feel troubled, because by that time all their capitalists had already started in the liberal globalization, they started to invest in China on such a large scale, benefited China, but undercut the economy, the manufacturing economy anyway, in the United States. And by 2008, they were in considerable trouble. Their investment planning and so on. Of course, they managed to recover from it. That is the strength of the American economy. And that is why I would never write off the American economy. I think the capacity to revive themselves is very strong. So, but all that time, of course, was a time when the Chinese were given the opportunity to rise very quickly and become a challenge to the United States, in the eyes of the United States. But the fact is that China didn't do that to challenge the United States. China did that just to benefit itself, its people, to raise their standard of living, reduce poverty. All these things none of them can be described as being bad goals. They are very good goals. They are really meant to make China more prosperous and wealthy and so on. And also, of course, they strengthened their defense, because they knew that as long as they're weak, they're always vulnerable.
That's why South China Sea, it's a big deal for them and a big focus.
Because the idea that that a powerful country like the United States can park their aircraft carriers 25 miles off the coast of China freely, anytime they like, was unacceptable. What kind of security is that? I mean, an aircraft carrier is not a friendly ship. It's not about freedom of navigation. I mean, merchant ships, trading, everybody can do that. That's absolutely free. The Chinese will love that. But an aircraft carrier is not that. And the Chinese did that because in the 1990s, when the Jiang Zemin talked about, after the return of Hong Kong, we now like to see the return of Taiwan, and so on and so forth. The Americans sailed the 7th Fleet through the Straits of Taiwan under President Clinton, and so on. And just to show, don't you move, and so that means the fact that the aircraft carriers and the 7th Fleet can go up and down freely just off the coast of China, absolutely freely, its sense of vulnerability and insecurity grew out of that. Previously, they had tried to build a navy with Russian help, but with the end of the Cold War, even the Russians couldn't help them. And the Russians were not great naval people anyway, by American standards. So in the end, they had to build their own. But now they're not concentrating on the Navy. They know they can never match the United States Navy as a naval force. What they've concentrated on, as you know, on missiles, on submarines. In other words, defensive things. You don't come near. The missiles and the submarines will make sure that you dare not come. You at least will be very careful when you come near. So they've concentrated on that, and in the South China Sea, they started to take over some of those islands. But they were not the first. The Vietnamese have been doing that already, and then enlarging them to become airfields and so on. And in the eyes of the Chinese, that is how they see it. It's to defend themselves.
So Chinese behavior is naturally more defensive, not offensive.
Some people will argue that the fact that you build an aircraft carrier, that's an offensive force. Aircraft carriers are not defensive. The aircraft carriers per se is an offensive thing.
Yeah.
But actually, of course, Chinese now have three. They have 3 aircraft carriers now.
Which is like compared to the US? How
nothing.
How many US have?
11, I think.
Yeah.
11 aircraft, I think so. Anyway, the point is that the Chinese realize they can never, if they do what the Soviet Union did and try to match the Americans ship by ship and weapon by weapon, you go bankrupt. What you concentrate on is getting rich, getting enough money, and concentrate on how you defeat an offensive navy, which you can't defeat by sea yourself. So I think the concept of continental missiles, intercontinental missiles, and submarines, which are nuclear submarines that go very deep underwater, I think is a beginning of something. They have also space, using space to help the defense against any American naval force that could arrive off the coast of China. So that right now, for example, the American naval force is no longer off the coast of China. They're actually down in Guam. And they come in and out to show there's a freedom of navigation. But they do not come as they used, park there, as they used to. Like the Persian Gulf, they're parked there. And the Mediterranean, they're parked there. But the Americans no longer park their aircraft carriers inside the South China Sea. They come in and out. So that already is something I think that it's a bit assuring for the Chinese. So at the moment, it's not that tense because the Americans are also careful. They just want to assert their right to do it, but they're not parking there. And their Guam is much further away. For aircraft carriers to work from there, the planes have much longer way to fly. So that, and of course, the missiles, which are specially devised to aim at aircraft carrier teams. They're specially devised to do that. So that there's a deterrence. Your aircraft team will not get any nearer because the missiles can always attack. You must have counter missiles to fight a missile war. So that's what they're concentrating on at a different level. So I'm very interested to see that the Chinese are at least realistic enough to know that they're not going to just match the Americans. You have one more aircraft carrier, I have another more, and this go on, like the Russians did. I think the Russians actually made a bad mistake about that. They spent a lot of their money matching the Americans, and the economy just could not develop. Whereas the Chinese are not doing that. You can do what you like. We would find ways and means of deterring you and neutralizing whatever you develop in a defensive way. And of course, in theory, their intercontinental missiles now can reach the United States, in theory. And of course, so they can, nuclear war could actually, both sides can use it. So that's another deterrence for not wanting to have a war. So I believe that is what all these things taken together, I think I have reason to be a bit more optimistic than I was before. That part, the Chinese are doing what I would consider to be the minimum necessary to feel secure without concentrating on matching United States military force, which I think would have been a mistake. That's how I think the Chinese see it.
From the height of 95-year-old, what do you think in life matters much less than people think?
There's so many things, but I think the famous line is that you can't take it with you. So you learn that. So whatever you can attain, whatever you can do, and if you can do it well, you have reason to be satisfied. If you do something badly, you must learn from it and make sure that other people realize that you know that you have done poorly. So I think people are very, very thoughtful and actually very understanding when you recognize it yourself. And I've been very lucky again in my friends, in my students, my colleagues, all my life. People have been extremely kind and always recognize that I did try my best. I mean, I've not been as good as I should have been, but it was not because I meant to do harm to anybody, but I always thought I was doing the right thing, but got it wrong or something like that. But in the end, I was consistent in one thing, that I was always willing to learn. And whatever I learned, if I thought it would be useful for others to know, I was always happy to teach, to pass it on. And this is very satisfying if I can achieve that. And if I turn out to be right, and sometimes I can turn out to be right, then of course it's even better. But even when I'm wrong, if I can recognize that I'm wrong, and other people know that I recognize that I was wrong, even that is all right. And you've learned something. You learned that that was wrong. So that I won't do that again. I don't believe in that anymore. So that you learn from that as well. You not really learn what is positive, you learn what is negative. And this is one of the things about Chinese historiography, which is I find very interesting. The idea of history writing that we learn in the West really is a professional thing that started in the 19th century. There was no such thing as a professional historian before that. History was written by people who either, just keeping records and knowing, telling what they did and what they thought. But they were not history as a profession. Like, the famous von Ranke. Leopold von Ranke was the man who defined history as a search of truth. What really happened? So he was right. He had a scientific approach towards history, and he created the profession. But that was only in the 19th century. But history goes back thousands of years when people kept records. What were these records kept for? And from what I can understand, the Chinese represent that as the most continuous record by one set of people. From Sima Qian, the 3rd century BC, who produced a historical record, down to the present, is one tradition of history writing. And the history writing is not history for its own sake. History was always, what can we learn from the past that will help the future? There's always a practical side to it. And what you do is you don't try to know exactly what happened. That was of no importance. What's important is that what do you know from the documents that have survived? What documents should you preserve that will tell the future what was right and what was wrong? So you select and collect those documents that teach you what was successful and what didn't work. And you collect them, and that is what they call history. We translate the word as history, but the original meaning of it was actually documents, records. So they're not telling you this is what actually happened. They are saying these are the documents that have been preserved in order for you to learn. So that every dynasty, then thereafter, they became the habit, they developed the tradition of every dynasty writing the history of the previous dynasty that failed, and collecting all their documents that have survived, and selecting from those documents to show what worked and what didn't work, so that the next dynasty, or the present dynasty, can learn from it. And each dynasty did that for the next dynasty. And they did that for all those dynasties, down to Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, down to the Republic of China. And that attitude towards history remains. If you look at the Chinese, even down to this day, they don't pretend that their history writing is the truth. That's not the important thing. Even when they turn to rewriting the history along Marxist-Leninist terms, what they did was they thought Marx was correct, Marx's view of history was correct, so they rewrote their history to try and understand how Marx's idea of progress can be demonstrated through their history. And when it didn't work, they gave it up. Now they don't write Marxist history anymore in China. Now they're actually gone back to a kind of dynastic history in which they say, what did the previous dynasty teach us? So what they do, right, the kind of history now they're learning is that what went wrong with the Republic of China in 1911 to 1949, they failed. We don't make those mistakes, mustn't make those mistakes anymore. What went wrong with the Mao Cultural Revolution? We mustn't make those mistakes anymore. We learn from each time. So for example, simple example, most important one to my mind is that we don't use the word revolution anymore. The revolution is done. 1949, we had a revolution, second revolution, two revolutions, 1911, 1949. But the second revolution was successful. We don't need another revolution. What we need is to reform what was achieved by the revolution, because we made mistakes, like Mao Zedong made mistakes or other mistakes. We learn from them, we make sure we don't make the same mistakes again, and then we progress. And we learn from everybody else. We learn from the West, West number one, West number two, examples of Japan, Korea, economic examples, and so on. Industrial development, industrial capitalism. We learn, each time we learn, and then we pass it on, and then we can develop an understanding of the idea of progress that we learned from Karl Marx.
On the level 1 to 10, how happy are you?
I've been relatively happy, yes. I'm happy because
on the level 1 to 10.
My children are doing well, grandchildren are doing well. I'm waiting to be a great-grandfather. Yeah. But from the family side, I have every reason to be happy.
Yeah.
As I said, my wife gave me a wonderful family and provided me with the kind of support that made it easier for me to be happy. So I have no unhappiness in my own environment. What I'm unhappy about, of course, is that in broad sense, political leaders are not always wise. They don't actually learn from the past, even though some of them know it. Some of them, of course, don't know it. So they make mistakes because they're ignorant. And there are lots of political leaders who are basically ignorant. But they're only clever about winning in elections and winning power in a limited framework. But it hurts me to see governments fail and people suffer because they don't learn from mistakes in the past. And they continue to make mistakes, to be willful, and just, in a way, just considering the interests of their own group or themselves and their own elite groups and so on. A kind of selfishness and narrowness that creates so much pain and hurt and harm everywhere. And there are too many political leaders like that for the human race or the humanity to really make genuine progress. It slows us down. It makes us cause a lot of harm to a lot of people. And it's happening every day today. And it's unavoidable probably, but that gives me great unhappiness. I've never been happy with that because I see it all the time. Even though I'm happy myself, I have been very lucky, as I said. I've avoided the worst of these things, but I see it happening and I see the people suffering for it everywhere. Some for reasons which are very hard to understand. Some for historical reasons, but are they justified? I find very few of them are really justified for the kind of killing and violence and the damage they do to human lives. That is a part of our humanity that I can say I deeply regret.
Professor, you're 95?
Yeah.
95. How does it feel to be 95?
Well, I feel very lucky to be around. I never expected to be alive for so long. I mean, I was always regularly sick with this or that over the years. I'm not a particularly healthy or strong person. I don't do regular exercises or anything like that. But I always kept busy, and there were times when I was not well, often unwell, when I had to cancel all appointments and so on. But I've been very lucky that I have not, up to now anyway, touch wood, I haven't developed any really serious illness that would take me off. And so I'm still around. Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, as they say, I mean, I guess it could be genetic. It could be, but my mother lived to 88. My father died quite young. He was only 68 or 69. So I can't even say it's entirely genetic, but it could be, because my father had a very tough childhood, and so there were other reasons why he did not live as long. But my mother lived to 88. So. And for that generation to live to 88 is fantastic.
Yeah. On a personal level, do you have any regrets in life?
Oh, many. Lots of regrets. But I think I would say that I have a very positive attitude towards those things, the mistakes I've made, the things that I've not done correctly or did something foolish and so on. I take that as lessons learned. And I don't take it too much to heart. I learned the lesson, make sure that I don't do it again, and find better ways of doing things and avoid making mistakes, and do my best to do all the things that would reach what I want to reach, but most of all, I think, help me to learn. That's the most important, because when I chose to be an academic, to work in a university, I recognized that I never wanted to work for any government. That's what I wanted to work for a university. And so the important thing for me is to find a university where they respect academic freedom. And I've been very, very lucky. From the time I started as an undergraduate till now, I've always been in universities where, at least not the first one in China during the Civil War, I was a nationalist one, they were also quite controlled. But I didn't feel I was too young to matter. But since I've been an academic, as a scholar, working and teaching in a university, I've been very lucky. I've been in every university that I've worked for and been in, I've had the academic freedom. And that is, to me, absolutely invaluable, because it enabled me to learn whatever I want to learn. So if I have any regrets, there are regrets I made when I had administrative responsibilities, and I'm not a natural administrator and don't particularly enjoy administration. Whereas what I like to do is I like to learn and teach. To teach what I learn. If I learn and I want to pass it on to others, that's my ambition in life. When I decided to be an academic, that's what I wanted to do, to learn and to be able to transmit what I learned by teaching.
Are you afraid of death? That's the end?
It can happen any time. I mean, I never thought about it before. Now I had to think about it, because just to make sure that I don't leave a mess behind. So I like to get things a bit prepared and ready. So if anything happens, my children will know what to do, and they know what to do. And my wife and I have both feel the same way. We've never any doubts, any worries about that. And my children are very good. They have understood what we want, and they know what to expect. And of course, they wish me well, and I'm still around. But if I'm not, they more or less know what has to be done. And that's very satisfactory. What is there to fear?